If you work with your hands, if your palms are rough, your back aches at night, and your life has been measured not in titles, but in hours worked and sweat spilled, this story is for you. This is not a story about a famous pastor, not about a wealthy man who lost everything and got it back easily. This is the story of a construction worker who woke up one morning with $8 in his wallet, an eviction notice on his door, and 3 children who still believed their father could fix anything. And then, on the worst day of his life, he met a wounded stranger at a bus stop. That meeting lasted only minutes, but by the next day, his life had changed forever. Before we continue, take 1 second, tap like, subscribe to Heaven Walks With Us, and tell us in the comments where you're watching from and what kind of work you do. Because your story matters too. Michael Reyes woke up before the alarm went off. He always did. Years of construction work had trained his body to rise before sunrise, even on days when there was nowhere to go and no job waiting. His eyes opened slowly, staring at the cracked white ceiling of the small rental house in Riverside, California, a ceiling he had promised himself he would fix one day when things got better. That day never came. He lay still for a moment, listening. The house was quiet in that fragile way. Only early morning knows how to be quiet. No traffic yet, no voices. Just the faint hum of the refrigerator in the kitchen, struggling to stay alive like everything else in that house. Michael reached into the back pocket of the jeans he had folded neatly over a chair the night before. His fingers closed around a few coins and a single folded bill. He sat up, unfolded them, counted once. Then again. $8. $8.17. That was everything he had left in the world. Not in the bank. Not in savings. Not hidden somewhere just in case. Everything. He exhaled slowly through his nose, the way men do when they're trying not to panic. On the front door, taped slightly crooked, was the piece of paper he had been avoiding since yesterday afternoon. A 3-day notice to pay or quit. 3 days had already passed. Today was day 4. According to the notice, Michael owed $3,600, 3 months of unpaid rent. If payment wasn't made immediately, the landlord would proceed with an unlawful detainer filing. Sheriff eviction, court order, everything official, everything final. He had read the notice so many times that he knew the words by heart. Still, he walked to the door and read it again, as if maybe, somehow, the numbers would change. They didn't. From the bedroom, he heard movement, soft footsteps, a quiet sigh. Elena was awake. She stood in the doorway, wrapped in a thin sweater, her dark hair pulled back loosely. She looked smaller than she used to, thinner. Not because she wasn't eating, she made sure the kids ate first, but because worry has a way of shrinking people from the inside out. "Did you sleep?" she asked. Michael nodded. It was a lie, but it was a gentle one. She glanced at the door. She didn't need to ask what he was looking at. She already knew. "I'll make breakfast," she said. Breakfast was toast. No butter, no eggs. The milk carton in the fridge was empty except for a few drops clinging to the sides like they were holding on out of habit. Elena set 3 plates on the small kitchen table anyway, for Lucas, for Sophia, for Mateo. Their children were still asleep, tangled together in blankets in the back room, unaware that by noon they might not have a house to wake up in anymore. Michael sat down at the table but didn't eat. He stared at his hands instead. They were big hands, scarred hands, hands that had poured concrete at dawn, framed houses under the California sun, lifted beams heavier than some men's entire lives. Hands that had built homes for other families. Hands that couldn't seem to protect his own. "What are we going to do?" Elena asked quietly. Michael opened his mouth. Nothing came out. He wanted to say something strong, something reassuring, something fathers and husbands are supposed to say, but all he could think about was the sound of a sheriff's knock on the door, the look on his kids' faces, the way shame feels when it settles into your bones. "I'll go out," he finally said. "Walk around, ask about work." They both knew it wasn't true. No contractor hires a man at 10 in the morning with no notice and pays him enough to save a family in a few hours. But Elena nodded anyway, because sometimes love means letting a man keep his dignity for a few more minutes. Michael stood, slipped his wallet into his pocket, and felt the weight, or rather, the absence of it. $8. As he opened the door, he paused. For just a second. Then he stepped outside, closing it softly behind him. He didn't know it yet, but this was the last morning his life would ever look like this. Michael walked down the cracked sidewalk of their street without looking back. He didn't trust himself to. If he turned around, he might see Lucas watching from the window with that quiet, grown-up seriousness that no 12-year-old should carry. He might see Sophia clutching her backpack too tightly, sensing something was wrong but not knowing how to name it. Or Mateo, still small enough to believe that problems disappeared if you ignored them long enough. So Michael kept walking. The neighborhood was waking up the way it always did. A delivery truck rattled past, its exhaust coughing into the cool morning air. A woman down the street watered dead grass like she was practicing hope. Somewhere, a radio played softly behind a screen door. Life went on, even when yours was falling apart. As Michael walked, his phone buzzed in his pocket. For half a second, his heart jumped. Maybe, just maybe, it was a contractor, a foreman, someone who needed hands on a job site immediately. He pulled it out. Low balance warning. No missed calls. No messages. He slid the phone back into his pocket and kept moving, his steps slower now, heavier. Back at the house, Elena sat at the kitchen table long after Michael left. The toast on the kids' plates had gone cold. She hadn't touched hers. She stared at the doorway, replaying the last few months in her mind like a broken film reel. The jobs that didn't last. The promises that fell apart. The silence at night when Michael thought she was asleep and she could feel his body shaking quietly beside her. She had learned to cry without making a sound. When the kids finally came into the kitchen, rubbing their eyes, she smiled automatically. Muscle memory. "Breakfast," she said, as if it were a normal morning. Lucas sat down slowly. He didn't say anything at first. He rarely did anymore. He had started paying attention in ways that worried her, watching adults, listening between words. "Mom," he said finally, "is Dad okay?" Elena's smile faltered for just a moment. "He's just tired," she said. "Grown-up tired." Lucas nodded, but he didn't look convinced. Sophia climbed into her chair and swung her legs back and forth, trying to be cheerful. "Are we still going to the park this weekend?" Elena hesitated. "Let's see how the week goes," she answered gently. Mateo pushed his toast around on the plate. "Why don't we have cereal anymore?" That one hurt more than she expected. She reached over and brushed his hair back. "We're trying something different for a little while." None of the children mentioned the paper on the door, but all of them had seen it. Kids always do. They finished eating in silence, the kind of silence that settles when everyone senses danger, but no one wants to name it out loud. At exactly 10:30, Elena heard a car slow down in front of the house. Her chest tightened. She stood and looked through the blinds, careful not to be seen. Just a neighbor. She exhaled, realizing she had been holding her breath. By 11, the air inside the house felt heavier, like it was pressing down on her shoulders. She kept glancing at the clock, at the door, at her phone. Still nothing. Michael, meanwhile, wandered without purpose. He passed job sites where men were already working, hard hats on, radios playing, concrete trucks backing up with warning beeps. He watched them from across the street like a ghost looking at a life he used to belong to. He knew that if he walked up and asked for work, they would shake their heads. Insurance, paperwork, liability. Come back next week. Next week didn't exist for him. He ended up near a small strip mall not far from the freeway. A liquor store, a closed-down nail salon, a bus stop with a metal bench baked pale by years of sun. Michael sat down slowly, elbows on his knees, head in his hands. For the first time that day, he let the truth rise fully to the surface. He had failed. Not as a worker, not as a man of skill, but as a provider. He thought of his father, long gone, who had taught him that a man's word mattered, that integrity mattered, that you built things to last, even if it cost more, even if it took longer. "What good did it do me?" Michael whispered. He didn't expect an answer. Back at the house, Elena heard another car pull up. This time, it didn't pass. She recognized the sound of the engine immediately, smooth, official, unfamiliar. She looked out the window again. A vehicle with markings on the side. Her knees weakened. She didn't wake the kids. She didn't cry. She simply stood there, gripping the edge of the counter, bracing herself for the knock that felt inevitable. Minutes passed. No knock came. Instead, the car idled. Somewhere across the city, Michael sat at a bus stop, unaware that time was closing in on him from both sides. Unaware that the day he thought would end everything was only just beginning. And that the silence surrounding him, the silence in his house, the silence in his wallet, the silence in his prayers, was not absence. It was a pause, a breath. The moment just before something eternal steps into the story. The sound reached Michael before the truck did. A low, confident rumble, an engine that wasn't struggling, wasn't coughing, wasn't begging for one more mile. He looked up from the ground just in time to see a black pickup roll into the parking lot of the strip mall, glossy paint catching the sun like it had nothing to hide. The truck eased into a space near the curb, perfectly centered, like the driver had all the time in the world. Michael's stomach tightened. He knew that truck. The door opened, and Derek Cole stepped out like a man stepping onto a stage he owned. Designer sunglasses, clean boots that had never touched wet concrete, a polo shirt tucked in just enough to suggest success without effort. He looked 10 years younger than Michael, even though they were the same age. Derek spotted him immediately. "Michael," he called out, smiling wide as he crossed the pavement. "Man, it's been a while." Michael stood slowly, wiping his hands on his jeans out of habit. He didn't smile back. "What are you doing here?" he asked. Derek laughed, spreading his arms as if the answer were obvious. "I was in the area. Heard you were having a rough patch. Thought I'd check on an old friend." Old friend. The words landed wrong. Michael glanced at the bus stop bench, at the empty street, at the truck idling quietly behind Derek like a bodyguard. "I'm fine," Michael said. "You should go." Derek shook his head, still smiling. "See, that's the thing. You're not fine, and you don't have the luxury of pretending right now." Michael's jaw tightened. "I don't know what you've heard," he said carefully. "I've heard enough," Derek replied, lowering his voice. "Missed rent, court notice, 3 kids, sheriff coming soon." Michael took a step forward, fists clenching at his sides. "You don't get to talk about my family." Derek raised his hands. "Easy. I'm not here to fight. I'm here to help." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a folded piece of paper, held it between 2 fingers. "I've got a job," he said. "Starts today." Michael didn't take the paper. "What kind of job?" "A good one," Derek replied. $250 a day, cash." Michael hesitated despite himself. $250 a day wasn't life-changing, but it was enough to slow the bleeding. Enough to buy time. "What's the catch?" he asked. Derek's smile flickered just for a second. "No catch," he said. "Just need someone experienced. Someone who knows how to get things done." Michael met his eyes. "That's not an answer." Derek sighed like a man burdened by someone else's stubbornness. "Fine. It's under the table. No paperwork, no insurance, and we move fast." "There it is," Michael said. Derek leaned closer. "Look around, Mike. Do you think paperwork is going to save you today? You need money now." "And the materials?" Michael asked. Derek's eyes gleamed. "You've still got contacts, suppliers who trust you. You get what we need on account. I pay you after." Michael stepped back as if he'd been struck. "You want me to put my name on your debt?" "I want you to be practical," Derek said sharply. "Everybody does it." "I don't," Michael replied. Derek's voice hardened. "You used to." "No," Michael said. "You did." For a moment, the air between them felt charged, heavy with old arguments and unfinished wounds. Derek broke the silence first. "You're going to lose your house today," he said bluntly. "Your kids are going to watch movers haul their stuff onto the street. You think they'll care how honest you were?" Michael's chest burned. "Morals don't feed kids," Derek continued. "Pride doesn't pay rent. Integrity doesn't stop the sheriff." Michael felt something rise in him, anger, yes, but also grief. Grief for the man Derek used to be. Grief for the partnership they once had before shortcuts and lies took over. "I won't cut corners," Michael said. "I won't lie to suppliers. I won't build something that could hurt someone." Derek scoffed. "That's rich. You're standing here broke. And you're lecturing me?" Michael took a breath. "I'd rather lose everything than become someone I can't recognize." Derek stared at him, the friendliness gone now, replaced by something colder. "You're making a mistake," he said quietly. "A big one. Then it's mine to make." Derek turned toward his truck, then stopped. "One more thing," he said over his shoulder. "When your kids are sleeping on someone else's couch tonight, remember you had a way out." He climbed into the pickup and slammed the door. The engine roared, and the truck pulled away, leaving behind the smell of exhaust and something darker, temptation rejected, consequences looming. Michael stood alone again. His hands were shaking. He looked down at them, willing them to steady. He had just said no to the only offer he was likely to get that day. And somehow, deep inside, he knew it was the right thing, even if it cost him everything. Michael remained standing long after Derek's truck disappeared down the street. The parking lot was quiet again, as if nothing had happened. No witnesses, no applause, no voice from heaven affirming his choice. Just the weight of it. He had turned down the one offer that could have delayed the inevitable. He knew that. The math was brutal and undeniable. Even if Derek was crooked, especially if he was crooked, the money would have bought time. Time to breathe. Time to think. Time to protect his family from the worst. Instead, Michael felt exposed, stripped of excuses, stripped of options. He sat back down on the cold metal bench, elbows on his knees, and stared at the cracked concrete beneath his boots. "Was I stupid?" he whispered. The question echoed in the empty space. Back at the house, Elena stood near the front window, watching the street like someone waiting for bad weather. She didn't know about Derek. She didn't need to. She could feel the tension tightening, the sense that something was approaching whether she was ready or not. When Michael finally returned, his shoulders were slumped in a way she recognized immediately. It wasn't exhaustion. It was defeat. She stepped outside before he reached the door. "You saw him, didn't you?" she asked quietly. Michael froze. "Who?" he tried. "Derek." He looked at her, surprised. "How did you—" "He came by last year when you weren't home," Elena said. "I remember his truck." Michael nodded slowly. "He offered me work." Elena didn't speak. She waited. "Cash, no paperwork, shortcuts." Her jaw tightened. "And?" I said no. The words hung between them, heavy and fragile at the same time. Elena closed her eyes for a moment. Then she did something Michael didn't expect. She reached for his hand. "I'm glad," she said. He stared at her. "Glad? Elena, we don't have time to be glad." "I know," she said softly. "But I'd rather face what's coming with the man I married than survive with someone else." Michael swallowed hard. "What if they come today?" he asked. "What if the kids see it?" Elena squeezed his hand. "Then we'll stand together." They didn't have a plan. They didn't have answers. But they had something neither of them was ready to name out loud. Faith. Not the loud kind. Not the confident kind. The fragile kind that exists when everything else has been stripped away. A car slowed on the street. Both of them looked up. Then it kept moving. Michael exhaled. "I can't stay here," he said. "I can't just sit and wait." Elena nodded. "Go. Walk. Pray. Do whatever you need to do." He hesitated. "I don't even know if I still know how to pray." She smiled sadly. "Then just talk. God listens." Michael kissed her forehead, then turned and walked away again, this time without looking back. He didn't know where he was going. He just knew he had to move. To keep from breaking. As he walked, his mind replayed Derek's words. Morals don't feed kids. He clenched his fists. Maybe Derek was right. Or maybe there were things more dangerous than hunger. Things that hollowed a man out from the inside. Michael walked until his legs ached, until the neighborhood changed, until the noise of the freeway grew louder and the streets felt less familiar. And that was when he saw the bus stop, an ordinary place, an ordinary bench, and a man sitting on the ground nearby, leaning against a wall, his arm wrapped in a makeshift cloth darkened with blood. Michael slowed. He didn't know it yet, but the decision he had just made to walk away from dirty money had positioned him exactly where he needed to be, at the edge of his last $8, and on the doorstep of a miracle. As Michael walked, his mind drifted backward, not by choice, but by necessity. Because when the present becomes unbearable, the past has a way of resurfacing, demanding to be understood. He hadn't always been a man counting coins in his pocket. There was a time years ago when Michael Reyes had believed, with quiet confidence, that hard work and honesty were enough. Back then, he was younger, stronger, still carrying the accent of the neighborhood where he grew up, still believing the American promise worked the same for everyone who showed up early and stayed late. He had started the way most builders do, swinging a hammer for someone else, hauling lumber, mixing concrete until his arms shook. He learned quickly, too quickly for some. He noticed things others ignored. A foundation poured a fraction of an inch off level, framing rushed to save time, materials chosen for price instead of strength. His father's voice lived in his head. If the base is wrong, the whole house will suffer. After years of saving, Michael partnered with someone he trusted, Derek Cole. They met on a job site outside San Bernardino, two men eating lunch off the tailgate of a truck. Derek talked fast, thought fast. He had a way of making the future sound inevitable. "You build," Derek had said. "I sell. Together, we're unstoppable." And for a while, they were. They started small garage conversions, remodels, single-family homes. Michael handled the crews. Derek handled clients and permits. Word spread, not because they were cheap, because they were solid. Homeowners talked. Inspectors noticed. One job led to another. Soon they had multiple crews, steady work, a reputation for doing things the right way. Michael remembered the first time they signed a contract that felt too big. He had gone home that night and hugged Elena so tightly she laughed. "We're going to be okay," he told her. And for a while, they were more than okay. They bought a modest house, paid on time, slept without fear. Their kids were born into a life that felt stable, predictable, safe. But success changes people, sometimes slowly, sometimes all at once. For Derek, it began with impatience, deadlines, competition, profit margins. "There's faster ways to do this," Derek started saying. Michael pushed back gently at first. "Faster isn't always better." Then the conversations changed tone. "Everyone cuts corners," Derek insisted. "You're too idealistic." Michael saw the warning signs early: cheaper materials showing up on sites he hadn't approved, workers rushed beyond reason, permits delayed but work continuing anyway. When he confronted Derek, the response was always the same. "Relax," Derek said. "I've got it handled." The breaking point came on a two-story build in a quiet neighborhood. Michael noticed cracks forming where they shouldn't. Subtle at first, dangerous if ignored. He pulled Derek aside. "What cement did you use?" Michael asked. Derek didn't meet his eyes. "A different supplier." "Cheaper?" Derek shrugged. "Same thing, costs less." "It's not the same thing," Michael snapped. "That wall could fail." Silence fell between them. Then Derek smiled. "That's business." That night, Michael didn't sleep. He thought of families living inside the houses they built, children sleeping under roofs he was responsible for. The next morning, he confronted Derek again. "I won't do this," he said. "We fix it, or I'm out." Derek leaned back in his chair, calm, too calm. "Then sell me your share," he said. The offer came fast, calculated, insultingly low. Michael knew what it meant. Derek had positioned him perfectly. No leverage, no savings large enough to fight a legal war, no appetite for public conflict that could damage their name. Michael had a choice: stay and become complicit, or leave and lose everything he had built. He chose to leave. He took the buyout, paid off debts, walked away with his conscience intact and his future uncertain. Finding work after that wasn't easy. People remembered the company, but not always kindly. Rumors followed. The industry is small. Stories travel faster than truth. Then came the downturn. Jobs dried up. Projects stalled. Contractors folded. Michael took whatever work he could, short-term gigs, day labor, jobs with no benefits and no guarantees. The house went first. Then the savings. Then the sense of safety he had worked so hard to give his family. He later heard what happened to Derek's company. An accident. A lawsuit. An investigation. Shortcuts always collect interest. But knowing he had been right didn't make Michael's situation any easier. It just made it heavier. As he reached the end of the memory, Michael stopped walking. The freeway roared nearby, indifferent. He realized something painful and clarifying all at once. Every step that had led him to this moment, every loss, every refusal to compromise, every door that closed, had shaped the man he was now. A man with nothing left to lose, and somehow everything left to give. He looked ahead and noticed the bus stop just beyond the strip mall. A man sitting near it. Something about the stillness of that figure made Michael slow his pace, as if the past had finished speaking, and the present was ready to answer. Michael didn't sit down right away. He stood there near the edge of the sidewalk, the noise of the freeway rushing past him like a reminder that the world never slowed down for anyone, not for grief, not for regret, not for honesty. People often talked about integrity as if it were a badge you wore proudly. Michael had learned it was more like a weight you carried quietly. After leaving the partnership, he told himself things would stabilize, that once the dust settled, the industry would recognize his skill, his experience, his work ethic. He wasn't asking for favors, just a fair shot. But the phone didn't ring the way he expected it to. Contractors were polite, sympathetic, non-committal. We'll keep your number. Maybe next quarter. Insurance is tight right now. Some didn't call back at all. Michael started taking whatever came. Short-term framing, concrete pours that lasted a day or two, jobs where he showed up before sunrise and left with cash that barely covered groceries. He told himself it was temporary. Then months passed. The truth was harder than he wanted to admit. Integrity didn't make him unemployable, but it made him inconvenient. He wouldn't look the other way, wouldn't sign off on rushed inspections, wouldn't pretend something unsafe was good enough. In an industry that rewarded speed and silence, that made him difficult. At night, lying beside Elena, he wondered if he had misunderstood everything his father taught him. Had he been naive? Had he confused stubbornness for principle? There were nights when hunger made philosophy feel cruel. When Lucas needed school supplies, when Sophia asked why they didn't go out anymore, when Mateo asked if they were poor. Michael never answered that one directly. Eventually, the house went. They packed years of life into cardboard boxes, labeling them with black markers like they were categorizing memories. Michael loaded the truck himself, each piece of furniture a reminder of a promise he had made and failed to keep. The rental that followed was smaller, older, temporary, he told himself. But temporary has a way of becoming permanent when you're barely staying afloat. He applied everywhere: commercial sites, residential crews, even warehouse maintenance. Some places called him overqualified, others underinsured. A few asked questions he didn't like, questions that tested how flexible his ethics really were. Michael walked away from more than one interview, knowing he'd just cost himself work. Elena never argued with him about it. That hurt more than if she had. She believed in him so completely that it terrified him. On the worst nights, when he lay awake listening to his children breathe in the next room, Michael wondered if doing the right thing had quietly condemned them to a harder life. He prayed less during those months, not because he didn't believe, but because he didn't know what to say. How do you explain to God that you did what you thought was right, and it still wasn't enough? How do you reconcile faith with eviction notices and empty cupboards? The answer didn't come. Not in sermons, not in scripture, not in silence. So Michael did what he knew how to do. He endured. He woke up early. He showed up when called. He refused to become someone he couldn't live with. Integrity didn't reward him. It stripped him. It left him standing exactly where he was, now near a bus stop, with $8 in his wallet and no clear future. And yet, as Michael stared at the ground, he realized something unsettling. Despite everything, despite the losses, the fear, the shame, there was still a line he would not cross. Even now, especially now, he could have taken Derek's offer. No one would have blamed him. But somewhere deep inside, a quiet voice had said, "If you break now, you won't recognize yourself tomorrow." Michael exhaled. Integrity hadn't protected him from suffering, but it had preserved something else: his ability to choose compassion when it mattered. He looked up. Just ahead, near the bus stop, he noticed a man sitting on the ground, still, silent, bleeding. Michael's steps slowed without him realizing it, because sometimes the reason integrity costs so much is because it positions you exactly where you need to be when someone else is about to need everything you have left. Michael slowed his steps without fully understanding why. The bus stop sat at the edge of the strip mall, a simple metal bench bolted to cracked concrete, backed by a faded advertisement that promised fast loans and easy approval. A place people passed through, not a place they stayed. Except today, someone was staying. A man sat on the ground just beyond the bench, his back against the wall of a closed storefront. The glass behind him was dusty, the inside dark and empty, like a business that had given up quietly during hard times. At first glance, Michael assumed what everyone else would have assumed: homeless, invisible, part of the background. The man's clothes were torn and dirty, his hair hung long and unwashed around his face. His shoes, if he had ever owned any, were nowhere to be seen. One pant leg was ripped at the knee, exposing skin scraped raw by concrete and time. But it wasn't his appearance that made Michael stop. It was the stillness. The man wasn't asking for money, wasn't holding a sign, wasn't calling out to passing cars or pedestrians. He simply sat there, breathing slowly, eyes lowered, as if he were waiting not for a bus, not for change, but for something else entirely. Michael noticed the blood next. A dark stain soaked through the cloth, wrapped loosely around the man's left forearm. It wasn't fresh enough to be gushing, but it was still bleeding steadily, the red seeping through fabric and dripping onto the concrete in slow, deliberate drops. No one around seemed to care. A woman walked past without looking. A man glanced briefly, then looked away. A bus pulled up, doors hissed open, passengers climbed on, and it pulled away again. The wounded man never moved. Michael felt the familiar tightening in his chest, the one he usually ignored, the one that came from seeing suffering and telling himself he had enough of his own to worry about. "You don't have time for this," his mind said. He checked his wallet without pulling it out. $8. His kids needed food. His wife needed answers. His house might already be gone. He took a step forward, then stopped. The man shifted slightly, wincing as his arm moved. For a brief moment, his face tightened with pain, but it passed quickly, replaced by something else. Peace. It didn't make sense. Michael had seen pain before. Job sites were full of it. Men cursed. Men complained. Men demanded help. This man did none of that. Michael glanced around again, half expecting someone else to intervene. No one did. He told himself he could keep walking, that the city had systems for this, shelters, clinics. Someone else would handle it. But his feet refused to move. Instead, he approached slowly and lowered himself to one knee a few feet away, careful not to startle the man. "Hey," Michael said quietly, "you're hurt." The man looked up, and something in Michael's chest shifted. His eyes were an unusual color, somewhere between brown and gold, and they carried a depth Michael couldn't explain. Not empty, not desperate, present. "I'll be all right," the man said calmly, his voice steady, educated, unexpected. "That's bleeding pretty bad," Michael replied, nodding toward the arm. "You should get it cleaned." The man smiled gently. "It looks worse than it is." Michael knew better. He had seen infections start smaller than this. "What happened?" he asked. "A few boys thought it would be funny to push me," the man said simply. "I fell. It passed." "You didn't ask for help?" "There's no anger in me," the man replied. "And pain doesn't last forever." Michael frowned. "You need medical attention." "I don't have money," the man said, "but God provides what we truly need." The words landed harder than Michael expected. God provides. Elena had said that, over and over. Michael swallowed. "There's a pharmacy right there," he said, pointing across the parking lot. "I can get you something to clean it." The man looked surprised, genuinely surprised. "You don't have to do that," he said. "I sense you're carrying heavy burdens yourself." Michael almost laughed. "Yeah," he said softly. "You could say that." He stood, hesitated for one last moment, then walked toward the pharmacy. Inside, the fluorescent lights buzzed. The shelves were too bright, too full, too indifferent. He asked the pharmacist what he needed for a deep cut. Alcohol wipes, sterile gauze, antiseptic cream, a wrap. $6 and change, the cashier said. Michael pulled out the bills and coins. His hands trembled as he counted. $6. He would have 2 left. He paid anyway. As he walked back, the plastic bag felt heavier than it should have. When he knelt again and handed it to the man stared at it as if it were something sacred. "You spent your money on me?" he asked. "It wasn't much," Michael lied, opening the bag. He cleaned the wound carefully, the way he had done for injured coworkers and for his own kids when they fell and scraped their knees. The man never flinched. "Thank you," he said softly. Michael tied the wrap snugly. "What's your name?" The man met his eyes. "Jesus." Michael froze. For a heartbeat, the city went silent, and nothing would ever feel ordinary again. Michael tied the final knot in the bandage and sat back on his heels, studying his work the way he would inspect a finished beam or a poured slab, carefully, quietly, making sure it would hold. The bleeding had slowed. The wound was clean. It was enough. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The noise of the street returned gradually, the distant hum of traffic, the hiss of a bus stopping a block away, the rustle of a plastic bag caught in the wind. "You didn't have to do this," the man said again, his voice calm but weighted now with something deeper. "You had very little." Michael wiped his hands on his jeans. "Doesn't matter," he replied. "I've seen worse. Infections. People lose arms if they don't take care of things early." "That's not what I meant," the man said gently. Michael looked up at him. "What did you mean?" The man's gaze was steady, kind, in a way that made Michael uncomfortable, not because it felt false, but because it felt too true. "I mean, you gave when it cost you something," he said. Michael let out a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. "I had $8, he admitted. "Now I've got 2. The man nodded, as if that confirmed something. $2 can feel heavier than 8, he said. Michael gave a tired half-smile. "You're not wrong." They sat there together for a few moments, 2 men at a bus stop, neither waiting for a bus. "What's your name?" the man asked. "Michael." The man repeated it quietly. "Michael." The way he said it, slow, deliberate, made Michael feel seen in a way he couldn't explain. "Can I ask you something, Michael?" the man continued. "Sure." "Why did you help me?" The question caught him off guard. Michael stared at the ground, searching for an answer that wouldn't sound foolish. "I don't know," he said finally. "My dad used to say, when you see someone bleeding, you don't stop to calculate. You help first, you figure out the rest later." "And your father?" the man asked. "Did he have much?" Michael shook his head. "No. He worked his whole life and died with very little, but he never let anyone walk past him in need." The man smiled, a smile that carried both joy and sorrow. "Sounds like a rich man," he said. Michael laughed quietly. "He wouldn't agree with you." A breeze passed through the parking lot, warm and unexpected. For a brief second, the air felt different, lighter, almost charged. "You're carrying a lot," the man said softly. Michael's chest tightened. He hadn't planned on talking, hadn't planned on opening anything up. But something about the way this stranger listened without interruption, without judgment, made it hard to stay closed. I lost everything, Michael said before he could stop himself. My business, my house, my reputation. I did what I thought was right, and it cost me everything. The man didn't interrupt. My family might get evicted today, Michael continued, his voice low. I turned down work this morning because it wasn't honest, and now I don't know if that makes me faithful or just stupid. The man leaned back slightly, considering him. Do you believe, he asked, that giving only has value when it's easy? Michael shook his head. And do you believe, the man continued, that mathematics always tell the whole truth? Michael frowned. Math is math. The man smiled again. Not all math. He looked down at Michael's empty hands. There is a kind of accounting, he said, that measures sacrifice, not amounts. Where 2 coins can outweigh a fortune, where 5 loaves can feed thousands. Michael felt a chill run through him. That sounds nice, he said cautiously, but it doesn't change the fact that when you spend $6, you have 2 left. The man met his eyes. And what if the world you see is only part of the equation? Michael's heart began to race. Who are you? He asked quietly. The man stood. When he did, he seemed taller somehow, not physically, but in presence, as if the space around him had shifted to make room. I am who I have always been, he said. The light caught his face differently now. Not brighter, truer. I am the one who said it is easier for a camel to pass through the eye of a needle than for a rich man to enter the kingdom of heaven. Not because wealth is evil, but because giving is rare when it truly costs something. Michael's legs felt weak. I am the one who looks for hearts, not resumes, the man continued. And today I found yours. The world seemed to tilt. Michael blinked, and when he looked again, the man was gone. Only the used gauze lay on the ground, and a dark stain on the concrete where blood had been. Michael sat there, stunned, his breath shallow, his mind scrambling for explanations that refused to form. $2. That was all he had left. He reached into his pocket, wrapped his fingers around the coins, and stood slowly. He didn't know what had just happened. But he knew one thing with absolute certainty. Those last dollars hadn't been wasted. They had been given. Michael stood there for a long time, staring at the place where the man had been. The concrete was still warm from the sun. The gauze lay crumpled near the wall. The dark stain of blood had already begun to dry. But the man, the voice, the eyes, were gone. Michael turned slowly, scanning the parking lot. No footsteps walking away. No figure blending into the crowd. No bus pulling off with a lone passenger. Nothing. The city moved on as if nothing extraordinary had occurred. Cars passed. A horn blared. Somewhere, a siren wailed and faded. His heart pounded. That didn't just happen, his mind insisted. Stress, hunger, exhaustion. Those were easier explanations, but they didn't explain the weight in his chest, or the strange stillness in the air, or the way his name had sounded when the man spoke it. Michael sat back down on the bench, suddenly unsure his legs could hold him. He closed his eyes. Memories flooded in Sunday mornings as a boy, sitting beside his father in a small church, listening to stories that once felt distant and symbolic. Stories about fishermen and widows and bread that somehow never ran out. Stories he had stopped thinking about when life became complicated. 5 loaves, 2 fish, 2 coins from a poor widow. He opened his eyes and laughed softly, almost bitterly. Divine math, he muttered. In the world Michael lived in, math was unforgiving. Rent was rent. Bills were bills. $6 spent meant 2 left. There were no miracles on spreadsheets. And yet, he reached into his pocket and pulled out the 2 coins. They felt warmer than they should have. He turned them over in his palm, watching them catch the light. Ordinary coins, nothing special, and still his hands trembled. What if I'm wrong? He whispered to no one. What if that man had simply been a stranger with good timing and a poetic way of speaking? What if Michael had projected meaning onto desperation? What if? His thoughts stopped abruptly, because beneath the doubt, beneath the fear, Beneath the logic screaming for control, there was something else. Peace. It didn't erase the problem. It didn't solve the eviction. It didn't put food on the table. But it settled into him like a quiet certainty that what he had done mattered. That giving when it hurt was not foolishness, it was alignment. Michael stood again. "Okay," he said aloud, his voice barely steady. "Okay." He didn't know who he was speaking to. God. The man? Himself. But the word felt like a decision. He began walking back toward home, his pace quickening with every step. Not because he expected a miracle, but because he felt called to return to be where he was supposed to be, no matter what waited for him there. As he walked, the words echoed again in his mind. Not all math tells the whole truth. Michael thought about Derek, about shortcuts and calculations and survival at any cost. That kind of math always added up in the short term, and always demanded payment later. He thought about his father. A man who never owned much, but never walked past suffering either. A man who gave without calculating return. That, Michael realized, was divine mathematics. Not addition. Multiplication. Not of money, but of trust, of mercy, of obedience, when it made no sense. By the time he reached his street, his heart was racing again, but for a different reason. There was a car parked in front of his house. Not just any car, an official one. His stomach dropped. The sheriff. It was happening. Michael broke into a run. Every fear he had pushed aside came rushing back at once. The sound of furniture being moved, his children crying, Elena trying to hold herself together. He sprinted the last stretch, breath burning in his lungs. But when he reached the house, he stopped so suddenly it felt like he'd hit a wall. Elena was standing on the front step, calm, not crying, not arguing. Two uniformed officers stood nearby, but their posture was relaxed, not urgent. And beside them was a man Michael had never seen before. The stranger was well dressed, but not flashy. Mid-50s, maybe. Clean-cut. The kind of presence that didn't demand attention, but commanded respect anyway. "What's going on?" Michael asked, his voice shaking despite his effort. Elena turned toward him, confusion and something like cautious hope in her eyes. "This gentleman," she said slowly, "says he's been looking for you." The man stepped forward and extended his hand. "Michael Reyes?" he asked warmly. Michael hesitated, then shook it. "Yes. My name is Daniel Harper," the man said. "I'm a developer." Michael frowned. "Okay. I won't waste your time," Daniel continued. "I'm working on a large affordable housing project in the Inland Empire, 200 homes. I need a site foreman immediately." Michael stared at him. "I think you have the wrong person." Daniel smiled. "I don't." The sheriff cleared his throat. "Sir, before we proceed with the eviction—" "There won't be one," Daniel said calmly, reaching into his briefcase. He pulled out an envelope. Inside was a cashier's check. Michael's breath caught. $7,200, Daniel said. Enough to cover the balance, the deposit, and several months forward. Housing should not be a distraction when someone is needed for work like this. Michael's mind reeled. "I don't understand," he said. "Why me?" Daniel studied him for a moment. "This morning," he said slowly, "I was sitting in a diner, panicking. My foreman quit last night. We start tomorrow." I didn't know what to do. Michael listened, barely breathing. "And then," Daniel continued, "a man sat down at the table next to me. Looked homeless, worn, injured." Michael's blood ran cold. "He told me," Daniel said, "if you're looking for a man who builds with honor, find Michael Reyes in Riverside. He will spend his last money to help a wounded stranger." The world seemed to tilt again. Michael thought of the 2 coins in his pocket. Divine mathematics, not subtraction. Multiplication, and for the first time in years, he understood. The miracle hadn't started when the check appeared. It had started when he chose compassion over calculation. Michael's knees felt weak as Daniel Harper finished speaking. The words, "He will spend his last money to help a wounded stranger," echoed in his head over and over like a bell that wouldn't stop ringing. Elena looked at Michael, searching his face for an explanation he wasn't ready to give. The sheriff cleared his throat again, clearly uncomfortable now. "Sir," he said to Daniel, "if the funds clear, there's no need to proceed with the eviction." "They'll clear," Daniel replied calmly. "You're welcome to verify." The check was passed from hand to hand, inspected, photographed, called in, minutes stretched. Michael barely heard the conversation. His mind was still at the bus stop, still kneeling on concrete, still staring at eyes that didn't belong to this world. Finally, the sheriff nodded. "Everything checks out," he said. "Mr. Reyes, you're current. No eviction today." The words landed softly, but their weight was enormous. No eviction. Not today. Not at all. The officers offered brief nods and stepped away, professionalism returning now that crisis had dissolved. The street felt strangely quiet once they were gone, as if the neighborhood itself was holding its breath. Daniel turned back to Michael. "I know this is sudden," he said, "but I need an answer today. We start at 6 tomorrow morning." Michael swallowed. "What exactly do you need me to do?" he asked. Daniel smiled slightly. "Build things the right way." He opened his briefcase again and pulled out a folder: plans, schedules, permits, everything precise and intentional. Michael flipped through the pages, his professional instincts kicking in automatically. 2-bedroom homes. Solid foundations. No shortcuts. Materials listed were first-rate. Inspections scheduled properly. Timelines ambitious but honest. Michael looked up slowly. "You're not cutting corners," he said. Daniel shook his head. "I don't want fast if it means unsafe. These homes are for families who've waited a long time for dignity." Michael felt something break open inside his chest. "I can do this," he said quietly. "I know," Daniel replied. "That's why I'm here." Daniel reached into his jacket and handed Michael another envelope. "An advance," he said. "So, you can breathe tonight." Michael opened it carefully. Inside was a check large enough that his hands began to shake. "I don't," he started. "You do," Daniel said firmly, "and you'll earn every dollar." They shook hands again, this time not as strangers, but as partners in something that felt larger than work. After Daniel drove away, the house felt different. Not bigger, not richer, safer. Elena closed the door slowly and leaned against it, her knees giving way at last. Michael caught her just in time. "It's real," she whispered. "It's actually real." He nodded, unable to speak. The kids gathered around them, sensing that something monumental had shifted. "Are we okay?" Lucas asked. Michael knelt and pulled all 3 children into his arms. "Yes," he said, his voice breaking. "We're okay." That night, they ate a proper dinner for the first time in months. Nothing fancy, chicken, vegetables, warm bread, but it tasted like abundance. After the kids went to bed, Elena finally asked the question she'd been holding all afternoon. "What happened today?" she asked softly. Michael reached into his pocket. He pulled out the 2 coins. They didn't look the same. They weren't silver anymore. They were gold. Not shiny in a flashy way, but warm, glowing faintly, as if lit from within. Etched on one coin was an image of a man kneeling, bandaging another's wounded arm. On the other, a family standing together in front of a small home. Elena covered her mouth with her hand. "What are those?" Michael exhaled slowly and told her everything. The bus stop, the wound, the name, the words about divine mathematics. When he finished, Elena was crying silently. "I don't know what to think," she said. "Neither do I," Michael admitted. "But I know this morning I had $8 and no hope. Tonight I have work, a home, and peace." Elena took the coins gently, holding them like something sacred. They placed them together in a small wooden box and set it on the shelf where Elena kept a candle and a worn Bible. A reminder. That night, Michael lay awake, not from fear, but from awe. He realized the miracle hadn't just saved them from eviction. It had restored something deeper: trust, purpose, calling. He understood now that divine mathematics didn't end at provision. It continued in responsibility. Because when much is entrusted, much is required. Tomorrow, he would begin building homes again. Not just structures, but futures. 6 months later, the sun rose over a very different morning. Michael stood at the edge of a construction site, hard hat in hand, watching the first concrete truck roll in. The land stretched wide before him, rows of foundations marked carefully, stakes driven straight and true. 200 homes, each one designed not just to stand, but to last. Families would live here. Children would grow here. Lives would take shape because someone, somewhere, had chosen to build with honor. Michael checked his watch. 6 a.m. on the dot. He smiled. Some habits never leave you. Work was hard. Harder than before, in some ways. Long hours, tight deadlines, responsibility that followed him home at night. But it was honest work, clean work, the kind of work his father would have been proud of. When the project finished ahead of schedule, Daniel Harper offered him another one, then another. Michael didn't chase money. He chased quality, and the money followed anyway. But that wasn't the part of the miracle that mattered most. What changed Michael wasn't the contracts or the checks. It was what happened after he had enough. Every month, without fail, Michael set aside a small portion of his income. Not because he had to, not because anyone asked, but because he remembered. He called it the $8 fund. Sometimes it paid for groceries for a struggling family. Sometimes it covered medicine for someone who couldn't afford it. Sometimes it was gas money or rent help or a quiet envelope handed over without names or conditions. And every time Michael gave, he told the story, not to glorify himself, not to promise easy miracles, but to remind people of one simple truth. The miracle didn't begin when the money arrived. It began when compassion did. The 2 gold coins stayed in the wooden box on the shelf at home. Michael never spent them, never tried to explain them. They weren't currency. They were a reminder that when you give everything you have, not from abundance, but from sacrifice, you never walk away empty-handed. Years later, when Michael was invited to oversee the construction of a children's hospital, he stood quietly in the finished hallway and watched families walk through doors that once existed only as lines on paper. He thought of the bus stop, of the blood on the concrete, of the man who looked like the world's forgotten and spoke like eternity, from $8 to hundreds of homes, to lives saved he would never meet. Divine mathematics, not subtraction, multiplication. Michael never claimed to understand it fully. He only lived it. And maybe that's the point. Because the greatest miracles don't belong to extraordinary people. They belong to ordinary people who choose love when it costs them something. So let me ask you, what are your $8? Not money, but time, compassion, forgiveness, a hand extended when it would be easier to look away. Somewhere near you right now, there is someone wounded, not always with blood you can see, but with pain just as real. And they're waiting, not for a hero, not for a preacher, not for someone rich enough to help someday. They're waiting for someone like you. If this story stirred something in your heart, it's because you already know the truth. You were never meant to wait until you had more to start giving. You were meant to give from where you are. So before you go, take a moment. Tap like if you believe generosity still has power. Share this story so someone else can find hope. And subscribe to Heaven Walks With Us for more stories that remind us miracles aren't coincidences. They're consequences. Consequences of choosing compassion over fear, faith over calculation, love over self-preservation. Because when you give with your whole heart, the mathematics of heaven always multiplies what you place in God's hands. And somewhere tonight, a miracle is waiting to begin. With you.